Always happy to welcome in senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, as he puts a very neat bow on the Bills draft class with us. Greg, from a long weekend of endless picks. Oh, can Greg hear us? Or did
Yeah,
he
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. So I had asked you if you recovered from a long weekend of endless picks.
Yes and no. Yeah, that's an open question.
He's still watching tape. That's why.
I still am. Catching up on some guys I missed.
You are an absolute.
All right, so let's.
You're a goner, man.
Yeah, he is a goner. All right, so let's begin here. I figure we might as well start with your favorite pick, maybe in the entire draft. Who knows? I couldn't ascertain whether you liked James Cook or George Pickens more in this entire draft class. So you can straighten us out on that, and then you can get into Cook, because people were saying, the Bills, they didn't get a receiver on any of the first 2 days. And I'm sitting here saying,
but they got a really good one.
Yeah, exactly.
A really good one. We're going to talk about him too.
Yeah, we will.
One of my favorite.
I know.
Hey, I make a list. I don't know if you guys can see this. I make a list of guys I really like when I watch, because I normally get asked, well, who are the guys you like? And if I don't make a list, I can't remember since I watched too many guys.
Right.
So 3 guys that were on my list of guys I really liked. And of course, I hope people understand, I do all this work before the draft, not after the draft. So I don't know where guys are going to be drafted. 3 guys on my list are James Cook, Terrel Bernard, and Khalil Shakir. So I'm just letting you know that those were 3 guys that were on my list of guys that I really like. So anyway, I'm available if Brandon Bean needs, a little help and wants to increase my investment portfolio a little bit. I'm good to go.
Yeah,
exactly.
Independent contractor.
Brownie and I were talking before the show. We spent the whole show, it seemed like, on Friday talking about James Cook.
And we had Greg on too talking about it.
And we were talking to him about him. And we didn't know. We had no idea.
I didn't know either. Who knows?
Right. Yeah, who knows? So all of a sudden, there he is. They take him, and
after trading back
now
twice,
we can claim genius. But back then, we had no idea. But
I think it's important. I think it's important that we claim genius, Steve. I mean, I think it's important that I say I knew exactly that they were going to take James Cook, and that's why we spent all day talking about him.
All right, now then enhance your genius and tell us why.
Well, no, I think the key point, and again, it's not a matter of being smart, but I think it's just, look, I've been doing this for a long time. I watch the Bills, obviously, every single week, so I've studied their offense in detail. It just struck me that James Cook really fit what the Bills are offensively. Because as we discussed last week, the Bills are not looking for a bell cow back. They're not looking for a volume runner. They're looking for an explosive player who can give them carries, but can also be a significant factor in the pass game. And to me, there were 2 backs like that in this draft, James Cook and Rashad White from Arizona State, who the Bucs, I believe, took, but Cook was the more explosive of the 2. So that, to me, just made conceptual sense, understanding the Bills' offense and understanding the player, James Cook.
Right. And he, even though he is not a receiver in position listing, he unquestionably is going to diversify this Bills' passing game, right?
Without question. And I think that's, again, why this was such – I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to sit here and say, well, I knew. First of all, I'm not that guy. I don't pat myself on the back. I just grind away. But I think about this stuff, as you guys know, far more than I probably should. But it just seemed to make conceptual sense, as the draft started to unfold. And, even as we discussed over the last number of weeks, Chris, as we were just going through players and trying to put them in the context of the Bills, it just seemed to me to make tactical, schematic, conceptual sense.
And I asked you this Friday, and we had this conversation. I want to have it once again. I'm going to ask you about this positionless football player on both sides of the ball. We've got guys that are hybrid safeties, hybrid linebackers, these guys that move all around, have different skill sets. They can blitz, they can cover, and do all that. On the offensive side, we don't see that as much. Now, we see a guy that maybe is a bell cow, back and catch and run and all that, but we don't see guys that maybe can play wide out and running back. Now we're seeing Deebo Samuels. He's kind of doing that. So is Cordarrelle Patterson. They're using him that way.
Yes.
And those guys are all of a sudden these really attention-grabbing players around the league that, wow, everybody wants one. Does James Cook have a chance at that?
In a different way. I certainly not that size, but I think, yes, one of the things that talking to offensive coaches as I do, friends of mine who coach in the league, one of the things I constantly hear about, Steve, and I think this makes really good sense, is what are you trying to do for your quarterback? You're trying to have your quarterback, in a sense, win before the ball snap. In other words, give him as much information about the defense before the ball is snapped. We know that playing quarterback's not easy, but you're trying to make it less difficult. And I think when you have players like this, and you can be more diverse formationally with certain kinds of players, the defense has to declare in many ways before the ball is snapped how they're going to play. And I think that's why players like this are so important. I mean, we even see players like Cooper Kupp, who is a receiver, correct? But we've seen him at times line up offset in the backfield. What it does, and you know this, Steve, from having played with a team that, was one of the early no-huddle teams. I guess Sam Weiss did it before you guys, but you were one of the earlier no-huddle teams, just lined up and played, is the defense can't communicate as much, the defense can't do as many things, and they line up in what coaches call their default defense. And every coach knows what the default defense of the opponent is. And that's what these kinds of players do. They put the defense in a position where all that communication and adjustment kind of goes out the window, and you have to line up in a default defense just so you can play.
Right.
One of the other guys on your card, Terrel Bernard, goes to the Bills with pick 89. And while I think he's unquestionably a really strong, diagnosed type linebacker, you look at his measurables and you translate them to the NFL. And I got to believe, Greg, if you want him to be as productive as you think he can be, you're going to really have to keep him clean from offensive linemen climbing to the second level. You got to have some good defensive tackles so he can just go run and hit and not get caught up on blocks, because at 219 pounds at the second level of defense, I think that's going to be not that he's playing linebacker here anytime soon, but if he ever does, I kind of think the only way to get the most out of what he can do is by keeping him clean.
Yeah, and, I know at the combine he was 224. I don't know what his actual playing weight is. As we know, guys change for the combine. But, I think that he's actually a pretty intriguing player. I thought that he could end up being a multi-alignment linebacker that could play both in your nickel and in your base. I think that he can play. I think his pass coverage improved dramatically as the season progressed. He's a very, very good blitzer and was used in that role at Baylor. So I actually, the more I watched him, and I ended up watching a lot of Baylor because they had a couple of guys. I think they had 3 or 4 guys in this draft. And I wouldn't call him elite explosive, but I think he's got the overall movement traits to make plays outside the box. As I said, he improved in pass coverage. I don't know. I really liked the player. The injury history was probably a factor for some teams, but he was, to me, a really good prospect.
Is he, and I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot by referencing the Bills roster, but, I mean, you've got Matt Milano, and still in the fold, who's a kind of an undersized guy who's a coverage linebacker, runs and hits. And then also he's here in replacement, it seems, at least in numbers-wise, to A.J. Klein, who had moments here in Buffalo as a starter because of injuries and all that. How does Bernard fit into those kind of slots with what the Bills have on the roster and the roles they need filled if injury happens?
Well, I would think in an ideal world, Steve, they would like Bernard to become that third linebacker. We know that this team is a nickel team. I mean, last year, with the exception of very few games where they clearly played base personnel offenses, they were literally a nickel on every snap. They had the highest percentage of nickel defense in the NFL a year ago. So this is a team that plays with 2 linebackers. I would expect that they would see Bernard. I mean, a third-round pick is not a throwaway pick. So I would expect that they would see Bernard as becoming A.J. Klein at some point. And who knows when that happens. But obviously Milano signed. I guess we have to wait and see. What's Edmonds' status?
He's in his 5th-year option year.
Right. So, I mean, they'll make a decision, obviously, on him at some point, I would imagine sooner than later. But the point is, I would think they would hope Bernard, assuming Edmonds is still there, that he would become that third guy who, if there was an injury to, let's say, Milano, that Bernard could fill that role. Now, he's not going to fill that role tomorrow, but that maybe with coaching, with experience, that he could become that kind of player.
And then we had Brandon Beane in studio yesterday, and I said, Khalil Shakir must have really been sticking out on your board if you're going to make a move 20 spots up the board to go get him. And he said, yeah. He said, actually, we probably would have taken him had we kept our 4th-round pick at 130 instead of drafting him near the top of the 5th round. So, and Brandon also said, Greg, I think you'll find this interesting, that he envisions him as a number 4 in their wide receiver room and capable of backing up all 3 spots, which is the exact same role that Gabriel Davis had as a rookie here.
Yeah, I mean, I love Shakir's tape. I mean, I really did. So Brandon Beane and I would agree on this. Now, in 2021, 70% of his receptions came out of the slot. I would imagine some evaluators and teams saw him solely as a slot. And I personally think he's the kind of guy that could roll out of bed tomorrow and line up in the slot in the NFL. But he's not small. He's 6 feet, 196. So he can play outside as well. And it wouldn't surprise me at all. And you just answered the question. If they see him as someone who can line up both outside and in the slot. And I did say in my transition notes that he has the versatility to line up in multiple locations within the formation. So he's versatile. To me, he was a refined and detailed route runner that showed separation quickness. He has outstanding body control and hands, run after catch, and this kid is super competitive. I really liked his tape. I would have seen him, and I don't, as you guys know, I don't do draft boards and say what round I think a guy should go in, but I easily could have seen him as better than a 5th-round pick.
And what jumped out at you? I mean, we always see, when we go to look at these guys, it's all highlights, right?
Yeah, but he's got some circus-type catches, Steve.
Yeah.
Well, if you're asking me, Steve, what stood out, I would say what stood out was body control and hands. He showed the ability to make catches that did not seem possible. That really, really stood out. Plus, the other thing I would say would be his competitiveness. So those 2 things really stood out to me.
What about comparing him to a pro that has been on the Bills roster, a guy like Cole Beasley, slot guys like Isaiah McKenzie, certainly different kinds of skill sets. What stands out in contrasting those guys?
I think he's different. He's more versatile. I mean, Beasley was almost your kind of quintessential slot guy. I mean, obviously on the Bills, there were times he did line up outside, but he was, to me, and I think to most, kind of the quintessential slot guy. He's not quite as big as Gabriel Davis, but I mean, you're getting Shakir, who can line up anywhere, Davis, who can line up anywhere. And from what I understand, and you guys would know this better than I understand that Gabriel Davis is incredibly smart and really can do anything. You can give him anything and he can do it. I really like Shakir's tape an awful lot. So when I saw the list of who the Bills drafted, and saw them draft these guys, especially when they took Bernard, which I guess was Friday night because that was round 3. And then when I saw them take Shakir, I was really happy because, again, the only way I can judge this is based on my evaluation. That's the only way I can do it, not what others say or where they think they should go. After you draft guys, to me, where you think they should go becomes meaningless. If all these guys turn out to be good players, that's all you care about.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Now, their last pick in the draft was a guy who has similar measurables and similar, it would seem, similar skill set to Bernard in Baylon Spector.
Yeah, I don't think he's as good as Bernard. I mean, I know what you're saying. I think that, he's one of those, he struck me as just a really good college linebacker. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I mean, he's a steady, rock-solid stack backer. He's got really strong key and diagnose traits. He's super competitive. He was kind of an early down run defender and underneath zone coverage defender. They used him as a blitzer at times at Clemson. He doesn't quite possess the traits you'd ultimately like to see, which, by the way, is the reason he's a 7th-round pick. I mean, I'm not knocking him. He was a 7th-round pick. That's what happens. He's not a great athlete. He doesn't have great play strength. While his inside-out, sideline to sideline play speed and range would be good, it's not special. So all these are reasons why he's a 7th-round pick. I would find it hard to view him as a higher-level starter. You know, I guess if you had to play him because he's super competitive and super tough physically and mentally, could you line him up? I'm sure you could, but I think when all's said and done, he's probably going to be one of your better special teams players, and a guy, if you had to put him out there, he would understand what his assignments are and execute them. He's just not at a high enough level athletically to do that, you know, snap after snap, week after week.
So what are if you look at his abilities as a 7th-round draft pick, give me and your knowledge about looking around the National Football League and all the rosters. Is he on a 53-man at the end of the day, do you think?
Well, again, I don't watch special teams, Steve, but my guess is he'd be a core special teams player, you know, because he's a linebacker, so he can run a little bit. I mean, he ran a 4.6 40, which is not bad at all. So my guess is he could end up being a core special teams player. And those guys, as you know, way better than I, so I'm not, you know, but those guys are very important on rosters. And I think he could be one of those guys and then be a backup linebacker.
Okay, so Greg, the important thing we need to know on that card, who was number 1? I mean, first of all, did you like?
Well, I didn't do it by.
Did you like Pickens
number
better than
1,
Cook?
number 2. I just did it as I was watching guys. You know, so like I'll give you an example, because a lot of these guys, other than seeing, you know, games on Saturday, Chris, during the season itself, you know, when I'm not taking notes, I'm just sitting at home zoning out watching college football. I mean, you know, Saturday was my only like semi-zone out day during the season because I'd work in the mornings and then go home and watch some college football. So like Daxton Hill was a guy who ended up being a 1st-round pick. And other than seeing Michigan on TV 4 or 5 times during the season, I didn't really know Daxton Hill. So when I put his tape on, I was, wow, this guy, I thought he was one of the better prospects in the entire draft, not just, you know, not just for a safety / slot corner. You want some other name? I put down George Pickens, of course. I actually put down a guy that a team in your division is getting a lot of grief for, Tyquan Thornton. I thought Tyquan Thornton was a really good prospect.
Patriots.
And yeah, obviously the Patriots are getting a ton of grief for that.
I think it's because of where they drafted him, maybe more than anything else.
He's
a lot
fast.
of people didn't have him that high, I guess, for whatever reason.
Yeah, and what did you think about the Patriots? This, and I know this, you know, I'm just saying, Cole Strange, and you know, I saw some videos of their draft.
Yeah, one guy I didn't see, so he's the only guy in the first 3 rounds, believe it or not, I did not see.
Seriously,
can you believe that?
So
he was the only guy in tape I didn't see.
From what we heard about what even people inside I mean, I didn't know anything, but they put out a video of the war room, of their draft room, when they drafted Cole Strange in New England. I don't know who the guy is, but he handed Bill Belichick the phone, and he looked like he was going to puke, handing the phone to Bill Belichick to tell this kid that they drafted him in the 1st round.
He couldn't even look at him.
I mean, he couldn't even make
Let me say this. First of all, of course, people are saying it's a terrible pick because they said they could have gotten him in the 4th round, which no one knows. Now, I'm not suggesting – I never know the answer to those questions. Maybe it's true. But I remember when the same thing happened, and you'll remember this, the same thing happened when they drafted Logan Mankins. And Logan Mankins turned out to be a pretty good player. And no one said, you know, after 3, 4, 5 years, well, gee, they could have gotten him in the 3rd round, because the guy turned out to be an all-pro and a 10-year really solid anchor of what was a really good O-line. So again, I didn't watch Cole Strange. Like I said, the only guy I didn't watch of the first 3 rounds. So I can't speak to what kind of player he is. I can tell you one offensive line coach who's been doing this for 30 years, who's a good friend of mine, loved Cole Strange, loved him.
Okay, well, that's the thing. No matter who you draft, where you draft them, if they're successful, you did the right thing.
Yeah, no,
right.
nobody cares.
It doesn't. Nobody cares. I mean, it all comes out in the wash. And if you cut them, everybody says I was a bust. You always, there's always draft picks that are busts. So it's really it becomes moot on both sides of the issue, whether they're successful or not. We get so wrapped up in it because it's that season, and you think, man, and you know that some of these guys are going to turn out to be fantastic players. But that's the frustrating part about it. Nobody even bothers to go back and grade these drafts back, years later when you really could make a judgment call.
And by the way, let's say Cole Strange, and I know we're running short here. Let's say Cole Strange becomes a really good player and becomes an all-pro. You know what happens in 3 or 4 years. Every year what happens is somebody goes back and says, let's redo the 2022 draft.
Right.
And then they'll put Cole Strange as the 20th player in the draft, so
right.
These are, but again, the flip side is then people argue, well, they don't understand the process of the draft. Well, I'm not sure Bill Belichick is interested in the process of the draft. I think he's interested in improving his football team.
Yeah.
Right.
And they have a certain way of going about that might not run parallel to the way a lot of other teams do it. And I think that's why.
You know what? Look, every team, you guys know this. Every team has good picks and bad picks. I look back on some of my notes every once in a while, and I go, oh, my God, that's what I said about that guy. He was out of the league in 3 years. Everybody's right, and everybody's wrong. It's still, with all the analytics, with all the sports science, it still comes down to human beings evaluating human beings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad that you evaluated all the human beings you did to get us ready for the draft and to review the Bills' draft class. There's a good chance you may need a new prescription, though, after all that film viewing. So
I think I do. I probably will. I'm going to go to the eye doctor. But I'm going to take James Cook with me for the next number of weeks. I'm telling you that. That was pure genius, I thought, on my part. Don't you agree, guys?
Oh, I unequivocally, I would have to agree.
That's why we're not going to talk to you again until July.
All right. Enjoy your summer, Greg. We'll catch up with you as we get closer to the regular season.
All right, guys. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.